Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott, the Motor City Madmouth, and tonight is a New England kind of theme as we welcome our newest guest to the program, Steve Baliestieri. And just so you know, folks, Steve is a writer for PatsFans.com and is also a member of the Professional Football Writers Association. Steve, can't thank you enough for being part of the broadcast, and hopefully we'll bring on as time goes on. But this is your first act out here, and we're looking to having a lot of fun on the broadcast, and hopefully our New England fan base will be able to take in a lot of the great insights that you're about to provide for us. Thanks for being here, Steve.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure, and I can never get enough about talking about football, especially nowadays with everybody with all the coronavirus stuff going on. I think all of us need a little distraction.
Well, and alongside of me, as always, my co-host David Levin. David, how about that? The dynamic. We have a three-man booth today with David, myself, and Steve. Well, so I don't know. I expect this to be a really great three-man booth. With that said, David, go ahead. You have a bunch of questions you want to fire out with Steve, and I'll incorporate where necessary. Go on.
Sure, thanks. Hey, Steve, how are you doing? I hope everything's going well for you and your family, especially today and what's going on in the world. But you're right, we need a little bit of a diversion, and of course football can definitely do that, especially with free agency still going on and the NFL draft that is fast approaching. Let me start out by asking you this. I know that the state of the NFL draft is changed, where they're going to go to a virtual concept, meaning one individual from each of the NFL teams is going to make a selection from a site location where, they're going to have a cameraman and it's going to be digital and all these things. How does that affect a team like New England? How does that affect a decision, that is made? I know that, it's Belichick and it's their scouts. And is this something that maybe transforms into the norm moving forward as far as technology in the NFL?
That's a great question. And, with Bill Belichick, he's always had a very, very small draft room. You look back at some of those drafts in the past, and they have, they always show a glimpse of different teams' draft rooms or war rooms, as they call them. And you'd see a lot of people in a lot of different draft rooms. And the Patriots have a really, really small one. Belichick doesn't like to have a lot of people in there that he doesn't feel needs to be there. And their feeling has always been that, they kind of made their decisions, and now they're just watching how the board, falls into place. I don't think it's going to affect them that much. I really don't.
Okay. It's funny you should say that, because Belichick doesn't like a lot of people in his war room until he was relieved of his duties. Tom Coughlin, who was the executive vice president of football operations here in Jacksonville, didn't like a large room either. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 people at the most, with the team owner there and the general manager, but everything was kept close to the vest. Does this mean that, and I'm still learning the process of what they're going to do, is that mean that they're going to take a cameraman from ESPN and, go to Belly's house, or how does that work out?
I know. That's a good question. Everyone's been trying to find that out. I don't, because it's going to be such a small gathering. I'm still picturing them going to be at Patriot Place there in Foxborough.
Still? Okay. All right. Because for some reason, for a man who is so quiet and so, secretive, I don't see them just, barging into his house with, as a lights and cameras and doing all that. Do you think, though, that because technology is changing, that the NFL may take some things they learned from this, and then the production changes maybe next year when things are a little more stable?
That's another great question. I think they will, because when you look at how this is all transpiring, I mean, everything's changing now, and I think they're gonna look at things different. I mean, the NFL likes to make everything an event, but I think how this has fallen into place. I think some things are going to change, and it'll be interesting to see how the NFL handles this, especially this year. As I said a second ago, they like to make everything an event, and this isn't going to be kind of that big production, that we're used to. But I have a feeling they're still going to try to jazz it up on us somehow. But, I think everything's going to change. I think everything that we're used to doing is going to change. I don't think life is ever going to go back to the way we normally had it. I think, this has hit everyone in the gut, I think. And it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. I think one of the things that may happen is the NFL, along with a lot of other businesses, are going to realize they don't need everyone in the office all the time, and you're going to see a lot more of this remote stuff working from home.
We've had the opportunity in the last couple of weeks to talk to our coaches here in Jacksonville, our players, by the Zoom concept of technology, which I'm still learning.
Join the club.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me tell you this. Steve, the only thing I know about Zoom going into the Zoom thing is what I used to do up the interstates, and I used to Zoom a lot. I didn't care what part of the country I was in. Anybody that wants to accuse me of having a lead foot, yeah, indeed, that's the case. But I don't know if you guys realize that there's 11 commandments and not 10, right? You know what that is? Well, there's actually 12. Okay, and you know what? You're free to use this on your website, Steve. Thou shalt not get caught, and thou shalt not overspend. So I don't think Moses was alive back then when we created these. So that's why you have Motormouth doing it. So take it for whatever it's worth. But the Zoom part, I can relate with the interstate, man. I love that foot. And to me, the interstate is my version of NASCAR. Sorry to interrupt you, but since Mr. Levin put Zoom out there, I did give you my version of it. Not only am I the Motor City Mad Mouth on the air, I'm the Motor City I can't say madman because then I'd be talking about Ted Nugent. The Motor City lead foot on the road. So go ahead, continue.
Well, I'll tell you, how about this? I'm Zoom old, and I remember that it was Morgan Freeman back in the 70s when I was watching it as a kid, on PBS. But anyway, that's as far as I go with that. I also thought that it was, you were talking about how technology will change everything. I also thought they might revert back to the way it was back in the early 80s. Remember when we would get up in the morning and watch ESPN or whatever it was, and they went to the ballroom in New York, and there was, 28 tables, and that was it. And then I thought it was going to be some production like that. I think this is going to be more, it will be theatrical, and it'll be interesting, but I'm curious to see what each team does, especially if there's a glitch. And you know that there's going to be something that's going to go on that's not going to be technically common, and they'll have some sort of issue with some sort of pitch, and of course probably it'll be Jacksonville. Remember that, Scott? At some point Jacksonville's going to screw it up. But anyway, I agree with what Steve said. You're going to learn from this, and they're going to realize that maybe less is more and less is better. Can we change topics now and talk a little more about the Patriots, your neck of the woods? You guys have been real busy this offseason.
To put it lightly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah. To put it, and we'll talk about the elephant in the room. How shocked were you, number one, that he left, meaning Tom Brady, and how shocked were you that it was Tampa Bay, of all places, that he decided he wanted to play football?
I think I was more shocked at the Tampa Bay thing than Brady leaving. I know, around this time last year, I had a close source that was friends with Tom Brady and told me that there was an offer on the table for 3 years and about $75 million.
Right.
And so we talked about that on the radio, and then was come to find out they pulled the offer back. And
that part I knew there was an offer, but I didn't know that they pulled the offer back.
Well, see, this is what the guy that I knew, the source that I knew, that told me. He said, well, it was there, and they just hadn't put it on paper yet, and they pulled it back because they were convinced that they didn't want to commit to a 42-year-old quarterback for a long-term deal. Through all this fiasco that went on, then it went through like OTAs and minicamp, and of course Brady was being asked about it all the time. He kind of took the high road, but you could see everything changed around training camp when they decided to give that 1-year deal with the out. And I think you could tell right then that Brady was. Now he took the high road on Howard Stern, and he said, he said all the right things. And
right, I saw that he walked the line real well. Let's just say that. So,
but you could tell he wasn't happy. He wasn't his normal self all through training camp and then all season. I think you could see that. And the guy that I know that close with his family told me that at that time Tom was ticked and he made up his mind he wasn't coming back. But there was still that thought that cooler heads were going to prevail. They were going to work something out and bring him back in and he'd finish his career here. And really, up until about a week before he announced he was leaving, I was convinced he was going to stay. Because the bottom line is they don't have anybody waiting in the wings that can replace him. Now, everyone likes Jarrett Stidham, what they saw in him, but let's face it, he's not going to be Tom Brady. And they didn't bring in any, other than veteran retreads that are out there. So, they're going to roll with Jarrett Stidham, that's fine. But you can't convince anybody that they're going to be better off for it, at least in the short term.
No, I definitely don't think so. To add to that, the Brady Belichick era is one of the greatest in NFL history, if not the best. And you see other quarterback coaches or quarterback, general managers or whatever over the years, Marino and Shula, Staubach and Landry. Will there ever be a combination like Brady and Belichick in this era again, given the difference in players and athletes and time? Are we going to see that again?
I think so. I mean, I look at Andy Reid in Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. I think they could do that. A lot's going to have to fall into place. I mean, the Patriots, Belichick was really, really good at building a team. And, everyone talks about his drafts and whatnot, but, that's just part of team building. And he's always been really good at finding, pieces that fit within that team. I think Andy Reid has the opportunity. He has a very young quarterback who's outstanding. And I think, he hasn't even reached his full potential yet. And Reid is an excellent offensive coach, and I think they have a shot at doing it. Is it going to be easy? No, of course not. But, and a lot of things are going to have to fall into place. But, yeah, I think it could happen again.
I'm gonna. Okay, how about this? I want to carefully word this so I don't slip up. Scott's teaching me well as we're going here. The Brady Belichick divorce, if you want to call it that, is something that divides a city. People are in favor of Brady and they love him, but he moved on. Belichick has produced Super Bowl champions. How's the fan reaction been? Since it was announced that yes, he isn't coming back, and then he went ahead and signed the contract in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, the people up here, they've fallen into that. Was it Brady or was it Belichick? It was neither. It was both. It was both of them. You have to have that relationship, and and even now, I mean, I see it now. Even some of the mainstream guys, the beat writers, whose side are you on, Bills or Tom's? Well, on neither side. I mean, the fact of the matter is, those two had a great working relationship. I don't think they were ever really close, as maybe like you remember when Elway and Shanahan, those two were really, really close. I don't think Brady and Belichick ever had that kind of relationship. I think that it stayed very professional. I think there was a lot of mutual respect there. But I don't think they were ever, like people say, this divorce. I don't think it was ever that kind of a relationship. I could be wrong.
Well, I'm glad that you've cleared it up a little bit, because you can't, and I'm going, I guess, as a fan, you really can't talk about one without the other. I mean,
No.
Brady's got his, gorgeous wife and the family and the commercials and the everything, but you can't separate one without the other, which then brings me to my next question. First of all, will Belichick be able to continue kind of momentum maybe coming this year? And then how long do you think it'll be before he hangs it up?
Yeah, he's been saying all along he doesn't want to coach when he's 70 years old.
Right.
I think he's going to coach a couple more years. I think what he really wants is to get his sons, kind of developed and kind of situated where they have their own career, and then I think he'll be ready to step down.
Gotcha.
And we're seeing that. I mean, his son Steve had a very it wasn't a defined role officially, but it seemed like he was doing all the play calling for the defense last year. And if you've ever heard his son talk, he sounds exactly like his father. If he was on the radio, you'd swear to God it was Bill. I mean, he talks with the same kind of deadpan. He sounds like his father. But when it comes to Bill, I think he's going to coach a couple more years. I really do. And, because he still loves it. He approaches the game, to him, like he says, training camp, this is what I look forward to teaching. He says that every year on the first day. And
I will tell sorry.
Go
I would tell you that in Jacksonville, when they were waiting anxiously for both David Caldwell and Doug Marrone to get the axe, which didn't happen, much to the dismay of both me and Scott. There were people on the radio here that honestly, I didn't realize that Steve was part of the staff, and I didn't understand the whole concept. But somebody said, "Why don't you go get Steve Belichick?" And one of the guys on the radio said, "But he has a minor part." He goes, "If you listen to him and you hear him talk, and he talks his X and O's, he sounds just like his dad, and that's the kind of demeanor Jacksonville needed." So they were talking about that here in the off season. I mean, for a possible replacement for our guy who inexplicably still has a job here, which I'm not quite sure. I love him. Doug Marrone is a great guy. I'm not sure how he still has a job, but we were talking about that long before that was even a possibility.
Well, it's funny when you mentioned Jacksonville. The owner Shah Khan owns a team in the English Premier League,
right?
Fulham. Well, a good friend of mine covers the Fulham team, and he does a podcast for Fulham or whatnot. Anyway, he got to interview Shad Khan, and he met his son Tony. And Tony was talking to my friend over there in England, and he was talking about when the Jaguars, when they bought the Jaguars, that one of the people that they sought out was Bill Belichick. And
right. He had influence in it, yes. It was.
Yeah, and they said that, they were asking him, a lot of philosophy questions of how to build the team. And, the Khans, I guess, really were very impressed with Belichick. And, there was a time there that I was thinking, if Bill's going to leave, he might go to Jacksonville. But then they brought in Tom Coughlin, who's also, him and Bill are really close. And,
right.
That Parcells, thing there.
That tree. That amazing tree.
Yep. Oh, what a, I was looking back, it wasn't too long ago, that 1990 Super Bowl, and I'm looking at that coaching staff, and it was like, oh my God, look at all the names on that coaching staff.
Right, yeah. It was quite impressive.
Yeah.
So what happens now for you guys? Are we going quarterback in the first round, or are we going to try and bring in another veteran, or are we staying where we are?
They're going to stay where they're at. I think they're going to go defense in the first round of the draft. But they might trade back. I mean, again, it all depends on how the board plays out. I wouldn't be shocked if the Patriots trade back into the second round because, they have the 23rd pick, and then they don't pick again until 87.
Right.
And I think that's a long way, between picks, and where this draft is pretty deep. I wouldn't be shocked if Bill trades back into the second round and then picks something up in between there. It's a crapshoot because there's so many variables. But I think they're actually going to go defense with their first pick. I'll say that.
Okay, to follow up with that then, I heard Jake Fromm was a guy that you guys were interested in the combine.
Yes.
Fromm's a guy from Georgia, and I followed him quite a bit, and I think that he's a good, serviceable quarterback, but I don't think he's ever going to be, he's not going to light him up. One of the possibilities of them maybe trading back into the second, since they have a second-round pick, and maybe that's where they go, or is that my off completely with that?
I don't know. I mean, with the Patriots, you never know what they're going to do because they're so close. They play everything so close to the vest.
Right.
I've heard that they really like Jake Fromm because, one of the coaches, it might have even been McDaniels, was somebody overheard him say something to, if you're looking for a quarterback, Jake Fromm has everything above the shoulders that you're looking for. Meaning,
I think it was him. I think you're right on that one because somehow I read that as well.
Yeah, I think it might have been McDaniels. I could be wrong. I don't want to quote him if he didn't say that.
I know. We here in Jacksonville were hoping for McDaniels here as coach as well. That didn't happen. I know that when he was interviewed originally, it was the deal that they had to keep Blake Bortles as a quarterback, and I know that I don't think your offensive coordinator was too great about that. But I'd love to see McDaniel here, but I know that that's a pipe dream. Let me ask you this too: there are three veteran quarterbacks out there: Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, and possibly Andy Dalton. Either one of those excites you at all?
None.
Wow.
Because at the time, I said I wanted them to re-sign Brady. If they don't re-sign Brady, I want to see what they have in Jarrett Stidham, and if it doesn't work out, then next year they're going to have oodles of room under the cap, and if things don't work out this year, then they'll have a little bit higher draft pick next year, and maybe they can move up and get themselves a Trevor Lawrence.
No, come on, that Jacksonville's getting that. Don't you know that? That's what we're doing here. We're losing. We're tanking for Trevor. That's exactly what. Ask anybody here, and they'll tell you that. We made so many changes to the roster this year, and let go of so many veterans that's the only thing we can be doing. So finally, because I know Scott wants you in here too.
That's okay. No problem. I'm loading up.
Okay, I know. I got you. You keep on going. Hold on there. The AFC East now is changed, and the stranglehold that Brady has had on the division for so long. Do the Patriots come in here still as a favorite, or is it Miami, or is it Buffalo, or what is their narrative now of the division?
Oh, I think it's got to be Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo pushed them last year.
Right.
And at the end of the season, they had a really good game between the Patriots and Buffalo. Now, Patriots are at home and they pulled that game out, and they ended up winning the division again. But I think that Buffalo defense is very legit. I think they're outstanding. And, they've surrounded their quarterback with a lot of weapons. I think, it's time for Josh Allen to take that next step up. There's a lot of people that don't believe in him. I kind of like him. He's not the most accurate guy, but I think he's going to be just fine. I think Buffalo has to be the favorite to win the division next year. I know Patriots fans don't want to hear that, but you look at that team, they were really good last year, and they got better. They got Stephon Diggs now.
Right. And then the final question, because you picked Buffalo, what's your take on Brian Flores down in Miami? Because I think he is putting together the foundation for a team that's going to be very dangerous in 2 years.
Yeah, I loved it with him when he was up here, and the players all just raved about him when he was the linebackers coach. They just had a great feeling for him. They really liked him. He was the de facto defensive coordinator. Bill doesn't like to give that title, but he was the guy when he was here. And again, I mean, the veterans, Hightower, Van Noy, they just loved the guy. And I wasn't shocked to find, Van Noy going down to Miami. I mean,
that was a given. That's a perfect fit, wasn't it? I thought it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's building a great program down there. It'll be interesting to see if he gets some offensive coaching for him, because I know he's a defensive guy. And if he I was kind of surprised when they went with Chan Gailey, but hey, we'll see how that works out. They need a quarterback as well. But I think they're definitely trending in the right direction there, and I think Beefalo's going to do a great job for the Dolphins.
Great. I appreciate it. Scott, you're up.
All right. Ready, Steve?
All right.
All right. Let's go ahead and talk about the Steve Belichick and Bill Belichick. That situation has Bob Knight and Pat Knight written all over it over at Texas Tech. What are your thoughts about that comparison?
The comparison of who?
Pat Knight and Bob Knight. Remember Bobby Knight's son?
Yeah. I don't know much about Pat Knight, so I know I don't want to speak out of turn there. So I think that I'll defer on that one.
Well, no. The only reason why I'm bringing it up is the fact they had father passing the torch over to son, and that's the only reason why I mentioned the comparison to begin with. So because I know you.
I think Bill's going to pass it on to Steve. I really do. There's some people up here that believe that it isn't going to be Josh McDaniels, the next coach. It's going to be his son.
Interesting. Yeah, because that was one of my questions. So, with that said, you had Greg Popovich coaching Tim Duncan. A lot of people thought Greg would step down, but Greg obviously stayed on because it looks like he wanted to see if he could win without Tim Duncan. How did that work out with Kawhi Leonard? I think Greg made the right call. So it's I guess the one thing that should probably challenge Belichick is the ability to say, now I have a new challenge in front of me. Can I deliver without Tom? And just like Greg Popovich did with Tim Duncan. So do you see some comparisons in that sense?
Yeah, I think you could make that argument. I think Bill was I think he's a football guy, and he just loves the coach. He loves the game. I mean, he's, for all the press conferences that people complain about, if, the best ones are usually on the Fridays when you get him talking about, because by then, the game plan's in, and somebody asks him a question about football history, and then he'll go off for a long time. I think, his love of the game isn't going to change. I think, he just likes to compete. He loves to teach. He loves to coach. And I think the Brady thing with the, wanting to win without him, yeah, I think maybe there's part of that. But I just think, when it comes to Belichick, he just wants to win, period.
Right. Okay. That's fair. So you talked about Josh McDaniels not being the head coach. Why do you think that is the case? I always thought that McDaniels would be the heir apparent to Bill Belichick, which is why I think he spurned the Colts job, hoping that he would get that job. Although I know that there were no assurances that could happen. But, again, the Colts certainly were interested. Then he pulled out at the last minute.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the same thing. They brought him back to groom him to be Belichick's replacement. I've just been hearing some rumblings, behind the scenes that perhaps Steve Belichick's ready to make that leap. I think it's a little soon for that, but crazier things have happened.
Okay.
Can I ask a question real quick about that, if you don't mind?
Go ahead.
Was there ever an incident or ever a situation where McDaniels was, he left to go be the head coach in Denver, and then he came back, and there were other teams that interviewed him. Was there ever a situation where either Belichick or Bob Kraft took him aside and said, "Look, this is going to be yours when Bill finally hangs it up"? Is there any, was that ever a discussion?
We heard that happened with the Colts job. That they made a last minute, pitch for McDaniels to come back to be the heir apparent for Bill. And that's
only at that time, or was there any other time that happened?
No, there was never any of that before.
Okay.
All right. So speaking of Josh McDaniels, and I was really intrigued when I saw it. He brought in Tim Tebow, and Tim Tebow, I guess, was one of the last cuts. How did the New England fan base feel about the possibility of Tim Tebow being in the quarterback room? And I know Bob Kraft was definitely rooting for him.
Yeah, I think people at first were kind of, you know, I think they kind of poo-pooed it that, no, they're not really bringing in Tebow. And then, the skill set that he had didn't mesh well with what the Patriots do. And he struggled really bad at practice. But, he's really a classic kid. And,
Yeah.
well, I say kid, I'm a lot older than he is, but he's just a classy guy. And, he handled himself really, really well. I was there for some of his press conferences after practices during training camp, and I kind of felt bad for him because some of the questions were kind of rude, I thought. When it comes to being an NFL quarterback or whatnot, I thought he handled himself pretty well. And in the end, I think the fans kind of warmed to him. It's kind of because they knew he wasn't going to challenge Tom for the job. There was never even a question of that. There was no doubt. But, I think everyone kind of wanted to see the kid succeed. And, when he left, I think people kind of warmed to him a little bit.
Okay. All right. So, how do you assess the job that Brian Flores is doing with Miami? I think he overachieved his first year. Not everybody thought he was going to be tanking to try to go ahead and get that number one pick. But the Dolphins may have gotten off to a slow start, but boy, did they get it together as the season progressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things about Flores and that he shares with Belichick is that burning desire to win. They're not going to tank. Even though they started off 0-7. I mean, a lot of people thought the Dolphins were going to go 0-16 with the roster they had.
Didn't they?
And then, down the stretch, they won 5 of their last 7 or 8, I think it was. And, I thought they played real well. And his team played hard for him. They knocked the snot out of the Patriots in Week 17 in Foxborough and took away their bye week. So it shows you that his players didn't quit on him. I think they're building a great program down there. If they can get a quarterback and they get a good offensive coordinator in there that can work with the quarterback, I think the Dolphins are going to be just fine.
Well, it's amazing when we talk about the Miami Dolphins and the New England Patriots. I have to bring up a couple of interesting games. I remember the one time when they brought out the Wildcat and the Patriots were really quite caught off guard there. Were you at that game, or what were your thoughts when they brought out that Wildcat gimmick?
I remember that game. Well, I wasn't at that game. I was at home watching it, and at the time I was shocked because it was something we hadn't seen, at least in the pros. I mean, you've seen it in college, but,
right?
They really took him by surprise, and they never kind of figured it out that whole game. They kept trying different things, and they couldn't stop it.
Right.
And that was a great game plan by Tony Serrano there, and that was a shocker. Now, obviously, teams caught on to it later on in the season, but that was one of the signature moments between the Patriots and Dolphins.
Well, I got to tell you, I know you weren't covering this game here many years ago, but I was actually living in South Florida, I believe, at the time when I was going to college. But I remember when Ron Meyer ordered the snowplow guy out there to kick that field goal that amounted to a 3-0 win. What are your thoughts about that one? Because Miami and New England have had some interesting games through the years, and I'm actually pointing out 2 of the most intriguing ones in the history of that rivalry.
Well, that snowplow is hanging from the ceiling in Patriots Team Hall of Fame in Gillette.
Is it really?
And yes, it is. It's hanging up there. And a funny story, my wife and I, we met John Smith, the kicker, who actually kicked that field goal. He's an Englishman. A couple of years ago, and we sat down and we were talking with him, and he said that he used to do the Super Bowl on BBC in England, and he would do it every year with Don Shula, and every year they would show that clip before the Super Bowl started to introduce the 2 people, and that Shula would always say, "Okay, roll that stupid footage."
Right.
And John Smith would say, then they'd roll it. So he said, one year, as a gag, he had the picture of him kicking that field goal in the snow, all blown up, and he autographed it for Don, and he sent it to him. And Don said, "I'm going to hang this up at my steakhouse. This will be the only picture of the Patriots that'll ever hang in one of my places."
That's funny. That is really funny. So with that said, okay, what about the legend of Ron Meyer, who actually orchestrated it, and then the snowplow driver?
Mark Henderson.
Right.
He was on parole from Walpole State Prison.
Exactly.
He was on parole from Walpole, and like a couple of years ago, they tracked him down or whatever, and the press was asking him about it because every year around that time they would try to find him, and he was like, "Hey," at the time they said, "Go out there," and he said Shula was yelling at him, and he's like, "What are they going to do? Put me in jail?"
That's funny. That is funny. Oh, that is too hilarious. So, what about the legend of Ron Meyer? Is there ever any talk?
Ron Meyer.
Yeah, I actually met him years ago over at Super Bowl 33 when I was covering it in Miami, and Ron loved joking around about it. Then again, why not? He's the one who orchestrated the whole thing in the first place.
I thought he was a great coach.
I think so too. Yeah, I liked him. So
I don't think he gets the credit that he probably deserved during that time.
no, I don't think so either.
I was 12, 13, somewhere around there. He didn't get the credit that he deserved as the coach there. Definitely during that time.
All right.
No, I thought he was a great coach. Until Belichick came along, my favorite coach of the Patriots was always Chuck Fairbanks.
Right.
And I don't think a better guy ever handled the draft, because the Patriots were the worst drafting team in the NFL by far until he got here. And then just today I was talking with someone about that. And his very first draft, he had 3 first-round picks. And he drafted John Hanna, who's now in the Hall of Fame, Sam Van Cunningham, who still leads the Patriots in career rushing, and Darryl Stingley, whose career, unfortunately, was cut short.
I remember that hit. Yeah.
Jack Tatum.
Yeah.
But I mean, talk about a first-round home run. That was Chuck Fairbanks. In fact, I was talking with Steve Nelson, who's in the Patriots Team Hall of Fame, and he was telling me that until Fairbanks, he passed away a few years ago, but when Parcells was down in Dallas with the Cowboys, he would bring Fairbanks in around draft time, and they'd talk about different prospects.
Well, it's amazing how you say that, too, because I remember when I got my first radio gig at WXYZ, the ABC affiliate in Detroit radio, I was doing sports talk. We tried to have Jack Tatum on, and he stood us up at the last minute. Boy, what we had to do to fill airtime was unbelievable. So we were scrambling. We didn't have the internet or all this other technology. But, it is what it is. That stuff happens in our business. So, we talk about Belichick and Don Shula. Do you think another motivation, Steve, for Belichick to hang around is to break Don Shula's all-time record?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He probably won't admit it publicly, but I know that he wants to break.
Well, an irony here, and now I'm leading to the Detroit part of the questions because I can't leave my hometown roots. But the Lions have given up have never hired a lot of great assistants that they should have had. I'll talk about Chuck Knox going to the Rams, Don Shula ultimately landing with the Dolphins / the Colts, and yes, Bill Belichick once upon a time was a assistant for the Detroit Lions, and now I'm getting depressed with every gaffe that they've made because we're one of 4 teams like the Jaguars that haven't been to a Super Bowl. So with that said, okay, the Patriots' exile to the Detroit Lions began with Bob Quinn, Matt Patricia. Now I hear they got 7 players on that team. What are your thoughts about the Patriots' exile to the Detroit Lions? Do a lot of these players have anything left in the tank?
Yeah, I think, again, Matt Patricia was a popular coach with a lot of the defensive players. I think a lot of them really liked playing for him. That's why a lot of them ended up there. Trey Flowers, Deron Harmon,
right?
Amongst others. But I think that's a big draw, and you're going to see even more Patriots probably end up in Miami with Brian Flores.
Right.
I think a lot of it has to do with that, with that draw from Matt Patricia, I know he struggled pretty bad so far up there as a head coach, and we'll have to see if he can turn it around. But if he remains up there, I wouldn't be surprised if he snatches another player or two.
Well, Bob Quinn's up there, and I know he's brought some of his people in from New England. But, unlike, I don't know whether Doug Marone's in that category, but Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia are, you better improve this team significantly, knowing full well that Matt Patricia inherited some good teams with Jim Caldwell roaming the sideline. So you talk about them trying to bring in a Super Bowl attitude toward Detroit, but it looks like they have regressed badly under this regime.
Yeah, they have, and the pressure's going to be on him this year. I think, he got kind of a pass to start off, but I think those days are over, and his seat's getting warm there, so it'll be time for the Lions to make some moves.
One of the guys I like to laugh at, and I'm sure you probably heard it, is Max Kellerman. I tend to wonder if he's had a mudslide every single time he goes on the air, to think that the Lions would trade Matt Patricia to the Patriots. Really? I love Matt Patricia. I think he's been a heck of a quarterback. I hope he stays with the Lions his whole career. I believe he wants to. But can you imagine, though, if Matt Patricia would ever land in New England?
You mean
Matt Stafford, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, Matt Patricia was, but Matt Stafford.
Well, I don't watch Kellerman. I can't stand him.
Me either. Okay. That's probably why I got the wrong Mats there, because all of a sudden I'm deliriously thinking about the Mats. But, yeah, I'm with you all the way. But Matt Stafford, New England.
I don't pay any attention to him. I think he's, I'll just leave it at that.
Well,
however,
I'll say it for you, Steve. He's delusional.
Yeah. Him and Nick Wright are the two guys I don't know how those two guys have a job, but hats off to them. They make a lot more money than I do.
Right.
So they must be doing something right.
Yeah.
However, if the Lions would be crazy to trade Matt Stafford to the Patriots, because then, who are they going to play in his place if they have a better quarterback?
Right.
And I think the answer is no. So why would they do that? What would be their motivation? Unless they're, let's help out New England.
Right.
And I just don't see that.
Well, it's funny how you say that. I remember a long time ago, a different sport, when the Tigers went ahead and had Randy Smith, his father Ty Smith, was with the Houston Astros. I can tell you the trades that went back and forth between those and how badly it set the Detroit Tigers franchise back. So I'm talking about the Lions for a moment. What do you think the Lions will be considerably improved in 2020?
No.
No. Okay.
I don't. I really don't. I think it's going to be tough for them to make any moves in that division this year. I think they're going to end up fourth again. I really do. I don't think they're going to jump over Chicago or Minnesota, and I think Green Bay will probably take the division this year, but I could be wrong.
No, well, I believe that you're right. So you talked about the connection between Miami and New England, and Kyle Van Noy got it going. So, so obviously there's consistency with familiarity, and I think a lot of the moves that were attributed in free agency were attributed to familiarity, wouldn't you think, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Ted Karras, who was the Patriots' backup center, but he started last year because of, David Andrews had the blood clots, and so he was out all season. The Patriots actually offered him an extra year and more money, but he decided to bet on himself and went down to Miami for a one-year deal, mainly because he believes in Flores.
Right. So when you talk about Brian Flores, what would you say are some of his biggest strengths as a coach?
I think, talking to some of the players, Kyle Van Noy said it, I think, best. Dante Hightower as well. He made things simple for them. So, the way he teaches and the way he talks, he makes the game simple for the players So therefore, like Hightower said it one day after practice, he from B-Flow, and he said when B-Flow, puts out something to us, it allows us to do things a lot faster on the field. We don't have to overthink things, and I think that was a little bit of a dig at Matt Patricia, but at the same time, the players really like playing for him. I think he still has that mentality as a former player himself. That he knows what players need to hear from their coaches, and I think that's what he puts out to the players under him and his assistant coaches. And I think that's the biggest thing is that he simplifies things for them, and they know what's expected of them.
Now, when Darius Slay left the Lions to go to the Philadelphia Eagles, it's not like he was paying any compliments to Matt Patricia. Do you find that some of the comments that Darius Slay were definitely online or just considered a cheap shot? Because you've been around Patricia, you know the coach a lot more than a lot of people. And Darius Slay, how do you let a great player go for practically next to nothing, a guy who's a Pro Bowl player?
I didn't understand that move at all.
Yeah.
And, at the time, it was kind of, when you see a comment like that, it's usually you get taken back a little bit, but at the same time, I think you have to see it for what it is, and I think Patricia was wrong there. And so I'm going to side on the side of Darius Slay.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I don't know how you could take shots at players, much less abuse social media, if indeed that's what took place, because my goodness, whatever happened to that point where you just go out there and you sit and try to talk it out in the coach's office and try to get your differences worked out, because there's a lot of ways to communicate, but I'm not so sure that's the way to do it for sure.
No, and from what we read about that situation, I think Patricia was totally in the wrong there.
Oh, yeah.
If that's the way it played out, if that's, how it truly happened, he was totally wrong there, and that's not the way to build a team. I mean, a lot of these guys that coached under Belichick, they know Belichick is a tough guy to play for. But at the same time, we've seen, he's a teacher, and he's not going to, he'll demean guys in the film room when the team's in there. And Teddy Bruschi mentioned that one day because he was like, they used to call it getting MF'd,
Right.
And he's like, who's going to get MF today? And if somebody made, he said, we might have won by 30 points, but if somebody on the defense made a bad play or they made a mistake, they'd all be laughing. Well, it's your turn to get MF'd,
Yeah, I agree with you all the way, Steve. How do you go ahead? I hate it when somebody tries to call somebody out amongst a group of people. That is, to me, as classless as you can get. It really is. And so with that said, Matt Patricia went into Detroit as a defensive coach. How could the Lions be so poor on the defensive side of the ball?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, letting guys like Darius Slay go, I think is a big,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But, we'll see. I mean, like I said, I think Patricia's under the gun this year.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to have a good draft, and he's going to have to turn things around. I mean, they're going to have to be very competitive this year if he wants to be in Detroit next year. I mean, they don't have to maybe win every one of their games, but they're going to have to be in all of them. And like that whole Darius Slay thing, I mean, he ripped his coach maybe a little too hard, but, like I said, whatever came about from that, if half of what he was saying is true, that's not a good look.
Well, and the thing is, when coaches leave the Lions, there's a history that many of the head coaches don't get hired again as a head coach. If you know the mystique behind that, and Joe Schmidt, never one of the best line coaches in a long time. Jim Caldwell actually left there with a winning record. So, and again, Matt Patricia, I think for him to stay as head coach, the Lions must win 9 to 10 games or he's gone. because that fan base is so desperate, and they're a great sports town, a great football town. So when we talk about some of Belichick's other his coaching tree, which one do you feel has actually done the best? I know. What are your thoughts about Bill O'Brien? Then the second half of the question, you could probably answer that one, whatever order you prefer.
Yeah, I think Bill O'Brien's done a good job of coaching the Texans. At the same time, I think when you look at that roster, I think you can make the argument they could possibly be a little bit better. But then again, the same thing happened. Why in the world would they trade, DeAndre Hopkins?
That's a mystery. Yeah.
And, O'Brien tried to clear it up. I thought he just made it even more muddier by saying, well, he wanted a lot more money. Well, he's arguably one of the top 2 or 3 receivers in the NFL, and you're going to have to pay for those kind of guys.
Right.
You have a young quarterback who's, ready to lead your team, I think, and deep into playoff runs for years to come.
Right.
You have one of the top receivers in the NFL. Why in the world would you trade him, 1, and 2? I don't think they got half of what they should have got for him.
So Michael Irvin's the one that supposedly talked to Hopkins, and take it for whatever it's worth. I don't know if Irvin is a reliable source, Hall of Fame player, but when you heard the Irvin version of that conversation with DeAndre Hopkins and all the, I don't know, when we talk about Watergate, I'm wondering if the cover-up is worse than the crime. So how do you assess that whole situation in general, knowing that there's a pattern amongst some of these Belichick assistants that want to try to become copycats? And, because only Belichick can only duplicate what he does, but how do we don't have a Xerox machine of coaches that think they can win the same way, because we all know that talent's different. So talk about the Michael Irvin comments on whether you thought they were credible or not, because that, to me, to make that stuff up is pretty difficult to do.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and again, I know Michael Irvin he's going to take the side of the wide receiver, because obviously, that's what he was. But at the same time, you have to look at that situation, the way it played out. And, Michael Irvin's going to go on television and talk about that. I really don't think he's making it up.
I don't either. I don't know how you can.
You're talking about a guy he's wearing a gold jacket. He's, is on the NFL Network. He's going on ESPN, and he's talking about, what happened there. I just don't think he's making it up.
I don't either. There's stories, Steve, you can make up, and then there's some stories you can't make up. And I'm finding, unless you're in Hollywood, okay, and you're working with the Actors Guild, and you're trying to do a small screen, big screen, that stuff is hard to script. It really is. He went there. He talked about O'Brien bringing up Aaron Hernandez and baby mamas. Really? Like, oh my God. He didn't talk around it, where he was just, kind of giving a little, a hint of something here or there. He went right there and went there with it, talking about Aaron Hernandez. Oh my God, that's not the way to win friends and influence people. No, that's for sure. So you bring up Aaron Hernandez. I know it's hard to bring that up, but I think it was very tragic about the way things played out with him. Did you have an opportunity to talk to Aaron Hernandez? And what kind of a player was he, or a person? No, I never actually spoke with him, but, we watched him from a distance, Excuse me. Sure. But the one thing that stood out with him, all the players kind of, on the sidelines and training camp and in the locker room, they have their own little, I don't want to say cliques, but they have their own little groups. Right. They hang with. And Hernandez was always kind of a solitary dude. Yeah, he might talk with some of the tight ends when they're off the field, but, you never really saw them interact with him
like you'd see with some of the other guys, and it didn't really strike me at the time, and until after it was all said and done, and then we heard about some of the things that were going on with him, and then it all kind of sunk in. But he was always kind of a solitary guy. I don't think he ever really gelled with his teammates the way they do with the rest of the guys, I think.
Okay, I've got a few more questions. First of all, how does Bill Belichick turn into David Copperfield trying to go ahead and take complicated personalities and make them winners? Randy Moss went in there, and Corey Dillon. I'll bet there's a bunch of other ones. Although he wasn't a miracle worker with Antonio Brown, but and then again, I don't think anybody could. No matter what this guy says and thinks he's going to try to do, that's a facade. But how does Bill Belichick manage to do it, knowing full well that he has a certain way of rehabilitating these guys? I'll tell you, because Randy Moss was a great soldier there, and Corey Dillon, you go there for the ring and you do what you've got to do. But tell me explain the dynamics of that one.
Well, with some of the guys, I mean, Bill talks to them and, he tells them, hey, look, we think you're a great football player, but you have to put the team above yourself. And if you do that, we're going to have an opportunity to play for a championship. And, Corey Dillon came in. He had the reputation of a malcontent. He came to New England. That was before I covered the team. But, I mean,
right.
Watching them from afar, I mean, he was a good soldier, and he put his nose to the grindstone. He had a tremendous year. That 2004 season, I think he ran for like 1,500 yards.
Right.
And I mean, their running game was tremendous. I remember Charlie Weiss was saying, there was one game when they were just piling up the yards on the ground, and then the opposing team called a timeout, and Brady came over and was talking with Charlie Weiss and said, "Are we ever going to throw the ball again?"
That's funny.
Yeah. But as much as it works for guys like Corey Dillon and Randy Moss when he got there, it didn't work for guys like Albert Hainsworth.
Right.
As much as Chad Ochocinco tried to fit in, he never grasped this offense.
Right.
It wasn't for lack of trying on his part, but we've seen it with other guys. I mean, he brought in Joey Galloway. That didn't work out.
Right.
Other guys. I mean, Delta O'Neal. He's had his swings and misses.
Yeah, I got to tell you, LeGarrette Blount wasn't a bad one, though, either, was he? Here's a guy that was an interesting personality and a power runner.
Yeah, and, I got a couple of opportunities. LeGarrette Blount was, when he was here, was heavily involved with the Patriots alumni and the charitable organization, and they would go out and they'd play charity basketball games against like the police departments for certain little towns around central Massachusetts here, and they would do it every spring and summer before training camp, and you got to talk with him, and he just he adored Bill Belichick. He thought the sun rose and set on him.
I'll tell you a guy that should have a business school named after him, Steve, is Charlie Weiss. How do you get all that money from all these different places after you leave New England? I mean, Notre Dame, Kansas, and what is his winning percentage? Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and Charlie was another one of those guys. Great coordinator.
Yeah.
Wasn't a good head coach once he left. Same with Romeo Crennel, I think.
Right.
Romeo just retired last year. Tremendous defensive coordinator. When the three of them were together, Belichick and Romeo Crennel, Charlie Weiss, that's the Patriots' the first three Super Bowls.
Right.
They gelled together tremendously, and but what makes a good coordinator doesn't always make a great head coach. And Romeo struggled when he was a head coach as well.
If you had to come up with 6 Patriots, and I know you have a big list there of the 6 best Patriots that you, who would be your best 6?
Well, I'd say Andre Tippett was first.
Okay.
And that was the era as I was growing up, right? Tippett, John Hanna, those two guys. Obviously Brady. Rob Gronkowski, without a doubt. I'd say Troy Brown because he was underdog and he was just like the typical overachiever, you know. He just did everything that the team always asked of him. He even played a little defense one year. I think you have to put Wes Welker in there. I know a lot of fans have revisionist history on Wes Welker because of that drop in the Super Bowl.
Right.
But when Wes Welker was with the Patriots, he was incredibly productive.
Right.
And one of my favorite players, and I know a lot of people didn't like him, was Rodney Harrison.
Oh, I liked him. I'm okay with him. Hard hitter.
Yeah. And again, he was a guy that just adored Belichick when he came here.
Right.
And totally bought into what they were doing. And Bill brought him in for a reason because he thought the team was getting a little complacent.
Right.
And, you know, his very first practice, Rodney Harrison started a fist fight.
Like that. So, the Patriots are 2 minutes away from an undefeated season. Tell me what that was like, knowing that they had it so close. 19-0 would have been unbelievable. So, can you tell me what it felt like for the New England era, that you were that close to eclipsing Don Shula in that sense, knowing that that would have been an unbelievable history, only for Eli Manning to blow it all for you.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I was at my brother-in-law's house. We had the game on a big projector on this wall where the screen was about 20 feet tall. We're smoking cigars, we're yelling and screaming during the game. Because it looked like you said, you know, the Patriots go down and score, and it looks like they're going to, you know, hold on. And then it looked like, I think it was Vince Wilfork was going to sack Eli Manning, and I was thinking that's the ball game.
Right.
And he got away. But just before that, I had that harbinger of doom because Eli threw an easy pick, and it went right through the hands of what's his name now? Now I'm drawing a blank on the cornerback.
That's all right.
Oh my God! Because he admitted afterwards he was more concerned that week with getting his big payday when he left as a free agent. And
David Tyree.
No, well, the Patriots corner.
Oh, okay, the corner. I'm sorry.
The Tyree catch.
Right, gotcha.
The Tyree catch was on actually Rodney Harrison.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Asante Samuel.
Oh, there you go.
Just before that, Eli threw it right in the Asante Samuel's hands, and it went right through his hands. And because I was thinking at the time, that's it. They're going to close this game out. They're going to go 19-0, and then as soon as Samuels dropped that, I was like, uh-oh, you never give a team a second chance because it usually comes back to bite you.
Gosh.
And then when Eli got away from, I think it was Wolford, and then he heaved that ball up there, and then Rodney couldn't knock it away. As soon as Tyree caught that, they were still, 25, 30 yards away.
Right.
I was like, they're going to lose, and that's it. The handwriting's on the wall. The Giants are going to win this game.
And yet, ironically, I know your cities are separated off of I-95. The Giants beat the Patriots in dramatic fashion twice. How much of those losses really sting, knowing that they were that close and it came down to one dramatic catch in both instances?
Yeah, the other one, Mario Manningham. You know, it was funny. I was on a Giants show. Excuse me. I was on a Giants show just before that Super Bowl, and I was talking with the guys there, and they were like, "Oh, you must hate the fact that that they're playing the Giants." And I was like, "Well, actually," I said, "growing up, I said I'm older than you guys. Before the merger, the Patriots didn't have a team in the NFL.
Right.
We had the AFL,
and
there was the NFL, and the NFL games were on CBS, and the AFL was on NBC, and we got all the Giants games. I said I grew up being a Giants fan in the NFL, and then, of course, we'd watch the Patriots when they weren't blacked out, because in those days, a lot of the home games were. I said, no, I knew all the Giants players. So they put me on the spot, and they were like, name 5 guys from that. Because they said, what year did you first started watching football? And I said, 67. And they were like, name me 5 guys. And I named about 8 guys on the starting offense. And they were like, okay.
Well, Steve, I got to tell you, I was at Super Bowl 39 in Jacksonville and covered it. It was unbelievable. It really was.
Wow.
Yeah, I was. It was the hotel accommodations were no good, and I knew that, so I had to take my Jeep Cherokee Laredo and found a rest area. And the way I was able to get a shower over the rest area was, I since I had access to the media center, I'd get a couple of media guys. The guy would give me his key to get me in, and boy, that was a very interesting situation nonetheless. That's a story for the ages in David's hometown. With that said, when you talk about dramatic catches, the one that really stands out to me in my NFL career as a writer was when I was actually at the Detroit Lions Green Bay Packers game, and Aaron Rodgers threw that Hail Mary, and I just was in the media room at the time. I was telling my colleague George Eichorn, George, I got a bad feeling about this game. Ironically, it was on my wife's birthday, and my mother-in-law had just died weeks prior, and I told George, I got a bad feeling about this. And he says, why? Because I've seen this drill too many times. I don't know what's going to happen. What do you think? Aaron Rodgers goes deep, and as a result, the Lions go down. Oh, my goodness. So when you talk about dramatic catches, God, goodness. So, and finally, okay, let's talk about a prediction as under the way things are now. What type of a record could you see the 2020 New England Patriots? I realize we have the draft and free agency, in particular, other moves. But as you see it on this date, we're going to check back with you as time goes on to see whether or not this changes a little bit.
Yeah, I think with Belichick still at the helm, I think this is a team that could go 8-7, maybe 8-8 and 9-7. I think they could still do that. I think they'll be competitive because, the way that it seems like they're building the team, they're kind of taking a page out of that 2001 playbook.
So
they're trying to get a big physical defense. They want the running game to carry the offense, and they're going to make things easy for their quarterback and take the pressure off. If they can do all those things, they should stay competitive. I don't think 8-8 or 9-7 is out of the realm of possibility for them, and a lot of it will depend on Jarrett Stidham because there's so little real tape on him. We saw him in training camp,
right?
And as a rookie quarterback, he had his good days, he had his bad days. All rookies do that. In preseason, he looked good, and in his one moment in the regular season, he looked real bad.
Right.
But, I tell people, don't read too much into that. Go back and watch Tom Brady's first game against the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
And in 2000, and he didn't look great either.
Well, so does 8-8, 9-7 get you in the playoffs then?
9-7 might.
Yeah.
But, it's tough to say. I mean, now there's, I think Buffalo's going to win the division. I think the Jets and Dolphins are going to be improved. And, excuse me, it's going to be the Patriots have a tough schedule this year.
Yeah, they do. And, of course, the Jimmy Garoppolo effect, how much are they biting their tongue about the fact that Jimmy's no longer there? I think Belichick thought he probably might be the heir apparent to Tom Brady.
Right, absolutely. And I like Jimmy because I thought he was a cool customer.
Yeah.
The funny thing about him was he wasn't a great practice quarterback. He used to make a lot of mistakes in practice, and everyone would groan like, oh, my. But then when he'd get in the game, he'd tighten that stuff up. And Matt Castle was the same way when he was Brady's backup. The year that he took over for Brady in 2008, I couldn't believe they kept him. He had one of the worst training camps and preseasons I've ever seen.
Right.
And we were all scratching our heads why Belichick kept him. And then you know, I thought he played pretty well in 2008. He wasn't great, but I thought he did well.
It's amazing how you know what GMTA stands for, Steve?
What's that?
Great minds think alike. Because I was about to throw that reference at you. I'm giving you a lot of interesting one-liners and all that stuff to go on. So, with that said, and the one of the famous lines that anybody could go out there and say in New England, okay, as Rick Pitino would say, Larry Bird ain't walking through that door, and this guy ain't walking through that door, and it doesn't look like Matt Kessel's walking through that door, because 11-5 wouldn't look so bad at this particular point. So, with that said, folks, you're listening to coverage of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth. My co-host is David Levin, and we're delighted to have Steve Baliestieri on the line. And Steve, while we have an opportunity to close out the broadcast, what I'd like you to do is let everybody know how they can get a hold of you, follow you, and make a few friends with you, because you've been sensational. You've given me so many ideas. I feel like the Energizer Buddy that I can't stop and stop and stop. But at some point, we have to stop and stop and stop. So we end up going across those initials, TBD or TBC, to be continued down to LINE. With that said, how can they get a hold of you, Steve?
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you guys. You can find me my work on patsfans.com. You can also find me on Twitter at CB7SFG. I also write for the military on sofrep.com. I cover military subjects with the special operations side of the house, because that was my specialty when I was in the Army for 17 years. So I'm always out there. And
thank you for your service, Steve. Thank you.
Oh, well, yeah. Thank you. It's like it's not often you get to change, careers in mid-stride, but I was able to do that, and it's been a blast.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I'm sure my dad was in the military for a lot of years, so I commend anybody out there. So meanwhile, folks, I hope you've enjoyed tonight's edition of the Sports Exchange. And Steve, you've been a great guest, and we look forward to having you on down the line, and hopefully you can provide us some good updates up in the New England area. We have a pretty good market up there, and we want to make sure that this broadcast is obviously a national broadcast, and it can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, Spreaker, Spotify, and Google, so that we ask everybody, if you like the broadcast, share it, download it, subscribe. And again, Steve, I can't thank you very much for spending your evening with us tonight. So on behalf of Steve Baliestieri, my name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Mad Mouth. Certainly, obviously, Mad Mouth, because Steve's gotten an earful with me the last while. And David Levin, well, what can I say, pal? It's been a lot of fun talking football, and I've really, really enjoyed this opportunity. So meanwhile, everybody, once again, please be safe out there. Do what everybody's asking you to do. And again, we hope that we've given you an opportunity to listen to our broadcast. You've learned a lot and gained some insights, and more important, have a diversion for what you're out there doing. So meanwhile, guys, thank you very much for being on the broadcast, and have a great night, everybody. Good night.